Dr. Sasheen, and I am broadcasting live on my first YouTube, and I'm very nervous. So if you happen to catch this recording and you have a comment to make, please feel free to do so in the comments. I have a blog called Living and Loving Your Best, soulPATH Services, and that blog is about not the cat making noise in the background. That blog is about self-improvement and self-empowerment. So I wanted to do a Google Hangout. Actually, I wanted to do a message to people who follow my blog or have been following my Facebook page and maybe haven't met me in person or seen a video of me or seen a picture of me and want to know a little bit about who I am. So this blog is entitled My 5 Simple Truths, from the founder of Living and Loving Your Best. So I hope that if you come in and you view it, that you enjoy it, and if you watch it on replay, that you find something very useful to you in the process. So I'd like to begin just a little bit with my story, a little bit about my story and who I am and kind of why I started Living and Loving Your Best. 42 years ago, I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and as with everyone, I was born into a great family with its problems. And I say as with everyone because we all have a place that we start in life, and we're not quite sure where we're going to go because we're just little beings in the world. And we have a clean slate. So I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and life took me in many different possible directions after a time. Once I reached adulthood and I began to realize I could make decisions for myself, I made plenty of bad ones and plenty of good ones. Through the course of my 42 years on the planet, I've done a lot of things. I've lived in some amazing places, I've met some amazing people, and I've done some amazing things. I went to school in the small town of Columbia, Missouri, to get my PhD in communication. That was the real turning point in my life, from a life that I had been living that was good, but wasn't quite the life that I'd hoped that it would be. As with a lot of us, when we hit our 20s, we're not quite sure what's happening. We're not really sure where to go or what to do or how to make adult decisions. Now we call it adulting, as if adult has become a verb that we're supposed to do and not a place of being that we can just relax into. I'll cover that in another hangout. Today, these are just about some things I've learned along the way. So I hit my 20s and I was doing life as most of us do, working and going to school and having a good time. And life was okay. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't bad. I had a series of great apartments and a series of great boyfriends and a series of fun cars and a lot of fun life. But there was always something missing. There was always something that wasn't quite settled for me. So what I decided to do was go back to school and get a few degrees under my belt. So I did that. And somewhere along the way, I began to work on this question of not is this all there is, but is this what it's supposed to be like? Is life supposed to just be a series of jobs and a series of boyfriends and you get married and there's a white picket fence and a couple kids? And for some people that answer was yes, but for me that answer was no. So I graduated with my PhD and I moved for the first time off the continental United States onto a small island in Caribbean. And there I began learning what I like to call now my 5 simple truths. But at the time I didn't have a name for them and I didn't quite know what they were or what they were going to be. I call them my 5 simple truths because the reality is I'd learned a lot of really complicated opinions, but I hadn't really learned my truth yet. And in my quest to finally answer some kind of pivotal life-changing questions about who I am and what I'm going to do. Drink water. I discovered that complicated answers didn't really work for me. That doesn't mean to say my truths are not complicated, because in some ways they're very complicated. But they're also simple enough for execution and practical enough for believability, but also impractical enough to get up off my butt and do something with them. So, okay, I went to Puerto Rico and I lived there for a year. And there I learned the first of what I would call my 5 simple truths. And I wrote things down. So if you see me look over and reference. It's because I want to make sure that I get this hangout right for you. If you've taken the time to be here with me, or if you are watching the replay through to the end, I want you to feel like you've gotten something for your time. So my first simple truth was, it's always going to be something. There was a really important time in my life where it felt like everything was going wrong. And it felt like every time I turned around, there was something else, something going on, something that I wasn't quite able to handle, or that I didn't see coming. You know, that thing that comes out of nowhere and blindsides us. And in my 20s, that happened a fair amount. And my usual response to that was, really? I mean, how do I make this not happen again? And what am I not doing right? And why is this always happening to me, type thing. And in my 30s, I got a little bit better about realizing that, you know, stuff happens. But I still didn't have a good way of dealing with it. And I didn't really understand the truth that the universe was trying to bring to me through it. So my year in Puerto Rico, one of the first things I realized very quickly is that it was always going to be something. When you live on a small island in the middle of the water, self-sufficiency becomes not just something that you say, but it actually becomes something that you become accustomed to, because it takes a long time for things to get to you. And things that you may be used to on the mainland don't exist on the island. Time changes, life slows down, people become different for you, and you need different things out of them. And you also learn a lot about the places that you run for escape when things go wrong. So I learned that it was always going to be something. There was always going to be a reason that something went wrong. There was always going to be a reason that someone didn't love me or like me, that I didn't get the job or I did get the job, that I was invited to the party or not invited to the party, that I had a love, but that I didn't have a love. And usually those reasons were just things that I didn't want to do anything about, couldn't do anything about, or shouldn't try to do anything about. So what do I mean by that? You know, it's always something. It's always the weight, the color, the hair color, the eye color, the height, the education, the lack of education, the money, the lack of money, the right location, not in the right location, luck, unlucky. There's always a thing that we're looking to put our finger on and go, that's why this is happening to me. No, the reason things happen is because it's always something. Life is just like that. It's a series of some things. Sometimes they're good things, sometimes they're bad things, but there's always something. And it's really about how we deal with that something. And what I learned living in Puerto Rico for that year was it really is how you deal. It really is how you embrace, or sometimes how you reject strongly those things that will come into your life to change your reality. Because sometimes it isn't about embracing that something. Sometimes it's about saying, no, that is not my truth, and I will not live it. That sometimes is harder than just embracing that something. So that was my simple truth number one, that I realized, yes, it is always something, but it's more important how you handle that something. So after I left Puerto Rico, I moved to the state of Washington, where another series of things came to my life, and um, people came into my life, and my world expanded in some ways and contracted in others. And I began to really get a chance to reassess, as you do, at certain points in your life. I call them the pivotal fives, 25, 35. I'm not 45 yet. So, but I think even at 15, you start to get a sense of what that's going to feel like, because it's 15 going on 16, and you're like, what might that be like with a car? So I moved to Washington State, and I began to think about my life and what it had been before, and the people who I was spending time with, and the people who I wasn't spending time with, and things around me, and the second simple truth began to unfold. And in some ways, it began to unravel. I'll explain that in a minute. But my second simple truth is, you are not the reflection of the 6 people you spend the most time with. You are, in fact, a reflection of the people whose opinions matter the most to you. We hear that a lot. You are the reflection of the 6 people who you spend the most time with, so be careful who you spend the most time with, right? And in some ways, that's really true. We tend to spend time with people that we care about. At least that's what I hope. But there's also another flip side to that. You can spend time with 6 people all the time because you work with them, or because you ride the same bus every day, or because you have coffee in the same coffee shop, so you formed a little coffee shop clique together. But their opinions may not matter to you. They may mean nothing to you. And so you spend time with them, but they're in fact not as influential over you as anybody else in the world, even though by proximity, you might spend a lot of time with them. And what I realized is that it wasn't the 6 people that I was spending the most time with. It was actually people that I didn't see on a regular basis who had the most pull over the kind of person that I was. And it was those opinions that I really had to assess and sit down and think about. Like, after years of being friends or colleagues, sometimes lovers with people, we tend to absorb their opinions of us as part of who we're supposed to be. And sometimes you gotta sit down and go, am I still that person? Was I ever really that person? And am I comfortable being that person still? And so I answered that question, and I continue to answer that question. So this simple truth is one of those signposts along my road that I come to every once in a while, and I look around me at the people that I'm keeping company with, not just company in the physical sense, but company in the broader sense of my life, people for whom I may only talk to once a year or twice a year, or I may talk to every day. I may ask myself, are they and I the kind of people who should be doing life together? Are we the kind of friends that I want us to be, or is there something I can do? Are they the kind of lover that I want to have, or am I looking for something else? Is this the kind of job, the kind of people that I want to work with 40 hours a week? That's always an interesting one, especially when you just got to put food on the table. But that is a simple truth that I think is really hard for us, because it is simple. When we hang out with people and we give of ourselves to people, their opinion becomes important to us. And we have to wonder, when our life isn't quite where we want it, or we are not quite where we want to be, we got to look around us and ask ourselves the hard question of, am I surrounding myself with beauty and truth and a reflective environment of people who see my beauty and truth the way I see it? Or am I surrounding myself with what I like to call the poisonous playmates? People who are good for themselves and not so good for me. And that isn't a judgment call. Well, in some ways, I guess it might be over certain people, but it is a recognition that everybody in our life isn't really good for us. And we hang on to people because we are used to hanging on to them, and not because we really need or want or desire to hang on to them. So as I worked my way through that simple truth, something happened. I gained different kinds of friends. I kept amazingly wonderful friends. And I realized that old saying, every friendship has a reason or a season. And some of the seasons were done, and some of the reasons were over, which just made room for other people. And they always continue to make room for other people. And I'm always grateful for that one, for that realization of that truth. So we've covered 2 simple truths so far. So on with my story. Um, Simple truth number 3 takes me a little bit further back in my walk. I was born and raised, as I said, in Kansas City, and I was baptized a Christian and in Baptist Church in Kansas City, Missouri. And I thought in my head and in my heart that I would always follow that path. I won't get into religion at this point. That's for another broadcast. But one of the things I've learned along the way is God is not as simple as most religions would make it out to be. And I use the it deliberately. And I think it's important that people figure out what it means. And so my third simple truth is that you will find your God, and that is all that matters. And when I say the term God in this context, I'm using it with a small g and not a large g, uppercase G. It takes a fair amount of self-awareness to realize that sometimes the God of your childhood is not the God of your life. And it also takes a fair amount of awareness sometimes to realize that the God of your childhood is, in fact, the God of your life. Either one of those directions is okay. When I was rolling through my 20s, this question didn't haunt me. It wasn't a question that I worried about. It wasn't a conversation that kept me up at night. When I got into my 30s, it became a little more interesting to me. Not in the, oh my God, I'm going to die because I hit 30 kind of way, but more of a keeping in line with simple truth number two. Simple truth number three was, okay, so if the people I surround myself with, opinions matter, what does God look like in that? And what does God look like to me? And whose version of God is most important? So when I did that, I had some really interesting moments where I had to look not only at what I had been taught, but also what I currently and still believe. And through a lot of reading and studying and relationships with people all throughout my 30s, I realized some really profoundly important things. And the most important of those things was that I found a version of God that worked for me. And that was really important to the rest of my life. And it's really important to the rest of my life moving forward. Now, if you are an agnostic or an atheist or someone who says, well, that whole conversation of simple truth number three doesn't really work for me, I would argue back and say, I'm not talking about God in the big G sense of the word at all. I'm talking about that sense of knowing of who we are and our place in a greater cosmos. Because even a scientist, and I consider myself a scientist actually, recognizes that we don't have truth for everything or facts for everything. That's why we call them theories. But we do have ideas, and we do believe that there's a universe that's bigger and expanding in ways that we don't even know. And so sometimes I think it's important to just acknowledge that we will all find our mystery, and that is okay, whatever that mystery may be. Okay, moving on to simple truth number 4. I have to turn the page. Oh, this one's good. It's so I used to think that simple truth number 3 was the big controversy. You know, the idea that we would all find God. But boy, was I wrong. People have a lot easier time accepting that we'll all find a God that works for us, and that's okay. And those who don't tend to click away, and we're fine with that too. But simple truth number 4, for some reason, hit a note chord in people that I was not expecting when I began talking about it. Simple truth number 4 is luxury and pleasure are our birthright. Wow. Our birthright. So we come into this world, little bitty beings, and someone loves you and cuddles you and tickles you under the chin, and you feel it. It feels good. And when you're a baby, it's all about senses, right? We have no words. We have no way of knowing the world except about how good something feels to us. So before that gets told, before we get told that you shouldn't feel so much, we don't know that feeling is bad. So everything is luxury. Everything is the height of wonderfulness, and everything is beautiful and overly exciting and overly generous and overly gorgeous, and everything feels amazing. And then it doesn't. But I'm here to say that through the course of what I've learned through my living, and the one thing that I've always gravitated back to was this idea of luxury and luxury living and pleasure. And when I say luxury living, people get really crazy. They're like, oh, you're just talking about money, and you're talking about being broke, and you're talking about spending on things that you don't need. Yes and no. I firmly believe and live my life in a way that it is infinitely easier to get me to do something that I love and that feels good than it is to get me to do something I hate and that feels crappy. Most people think that way. And that's what I say, that luxury and pleasure are birthright. I don't think that any of us born in this time with all that is available to us, everything from the hangout that I'm engaging in with you right now on your computer or your smartphone or your tablet, to trekking to the top of Mount Everest with an IMAX crew, because that's crazy. But to be born in this time with all that is available to us sensorily, it's hard to believe that some of us don't believe that luxury and pleasure are our birthright, that we're given so much to feel good about in a world that sometimes forgets how to feel good, and we just take it for granted. So when I say luxury and pleasure is a birthright, what I mean is simply this. If you are motivated to change your life, if you are looking for a reason to change your identity, to shift your existence, why wouldn't you go towards things that make you feel good as opposed to towards things that make you feel bad? When we push and push and push towards things that don't resonate with our authentic truth, that don't feel like they're part of who we are, that don't make us feel good in our souls and in our bones and in our skin and our hair and our nails, when we move towards things that don't do that, we find misery very easily. And through the course of living, I think a lot of people would argue that if they had a chance to do things differently, they might gravitate more towards the things that felt good to them and less towards the things that they were supposed to do. And yes, I use the air quotes, don't hurt me. That they're supposed to do, because the things that we are supposed to do sometimes don't feel very good. So what am I saying? You know, yes, you could swim in a vat of ice cream. I mean, if that feels good to you, then it feels good to you. Conversely, you could hate ice cream because it's not your thing, but you really love raw vegetables and you just want a whole plate of them as often as you can get them. That's luxury and pleasure. Usually at this point, I'm supposed to give some kind of caveat that says, what I'm talking about is pleasure and luxury that doesn't debase or demean or dehumanize. I always like to think that people are better than others may give them credit for. And I have learned that that's not always the case. But I do believe that when your soul is right with you, when your soul's story is being told in a new way that gravitates towards the things that make you feel good, it's really hard to do things to other people that would make them feel bad, because that would make me feel bad. And if I'm on a path and I'm gravitating toward a life of people, a life that I feel good at, then it just stands to reason. I want you to feel good too. I want you to feel good too. I want you, you person looking at me, I want you to feel good too. And so if I'm going to do things that debase, dehumanize, and demoralize, then I can't possibly be living out of any place of authenticity. And I'm definitely not living out of a place of pleasure or luxury or luxuriating in the sense of living, because that's not really luxuriating in the sense of living. Pain is not luxury. Pain is not pleasure. Pain is not pleasure. And I think as adults living in the world in human bodies, attempting to do this, what is now a verb called adulting, we recognize that there's a place in all of us where our kernel of truth holds sacred another person, other life beings on the planet. And so I used to add the caveat, but I don't really add the caveat very much anymore, because I recognize that I'm speaking to the kernel of that truth in all of us, and I'm hoping that it reaches through this first attempt at a hangout for me. And that I hope that as it comes through, that it becomes something that resonates. And when that happens, I don't think we hurt other people. I think we look for ways to make ourselves happy. And does that mean that we don't end relationships? No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean that we don't change our occupations. It doesn't mean that we don't end relationships. It doesn't mean that we don't move on and move away and sever. But it does mean that we do so with intention and with loving kindness, because that's really all any of us can do when we're trying to live as authentically as we can in our own skin. But that does lead nicely into my simple truth number 5. I like to get these things right. It's the control freak in me. Simple truth number 5 is, you don't owe anyone anything. I used to be the kind of person for whom guilt was a constant companion. And the reason it was a constant companion is because I was conditioned and socialized to believe that you owe people things for your very life. Um, and a lot of us, I think, are taught that if we're good, quote unquote, fill in the blank, boys, girls, kids, adults, sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, that if we are good, that we will propel others to be good. And if we act appropriately, then we can be held blameless at the end of our lives. And I just kind of call foul on that idea. I call foul on that. And the reason I call foul on that is because we aren't beholden to anyone else's narrative of our life. We are not other people's stories. We are our own story. We get told who we are. Remember those people I talked about in Simple Truth number 2? We get told who we are by a lot of people. And sometimes that gets really muddy and it gets very mixed up. And what we tend to do is try to live out this narrative of someone else, of someone else, of someone else. And we find ourselves in our 50s and our 60s going, I don't really know who I am, because I always felt like I had to be X or Y or Z. And when I wasn't, I just felt so bad because I couldn't be X or Y or Z. I wanted to be, but I couldn't be. And two things happened here. Number one, we think we owe someone else a living or a life, and someone else tends to expect us to give them a living or a life. And because of that, we end up very unhappy and very not, oh, I'm going to be right back. So, sorry about that. There's a tendency to think, well, everybody owes everybody something. Somebody owes you something. No one owes you anything. You don't owe anyone anything. You don't owe anyone happiness. You don't owe anyone gratitude or gratefulness. You don't owe anyone love or devotion. You don't owe anyone anything. That's the key to that sentence. When we think we owe people things, we get really resentful, and we get people resenting us for not giving us what they believe we owe them. Are free to give freely our love, our devotion, our affection, our attention. We're just as free to take those things away. We're just as free to say, I did love you, but I don't anymore. We are not free to say, you owe me your love because I've given you 20 years of my life. You owe me your love because I gave birth to you. You owe me your love because I want you to. And I'm going to do things that make you owe me. The simple truth is, I don't owe anyone anything. The ability to live authentically in this skin means I have to acknowledge the fact that the things that I do in my life, the real consequences always rest in here. They always rest in here. They rest with me, in my body, in my spirit, in my soul. And when I realized that, it was like a light bulb kind of went off. And it was a slow moving light bulb. It's like that, probably the very first light bulb that ever went off, but maybe one of the 10,000 prototypes that Edison had when he first went, oh wait, I think there's a spark of something happening in there, and there appears to be light coming out of it. That's the kind of light bulb moment that I had with Simple Truth number 5. It wasn't that was easy. It was a slow realization that by virtue of thinking I had owed something to people, I was unhappy. I was just unhappy. I could freely give my love and affection and caring and attention and time, money, and energy. And when I gave those things without feeling like I needed to feel guilty about them, they came so much more easily. But it took some time to realize that not everybody feels that way. And it took even more time to realize that that was okay. And then finally, it took even more time to realize that not everybody feels that way. That's okay. And I am allowed to feel that way. I am allowed to feel that way. So those are the 5 simple truths. They are, I'm going to recap them just because I've said a lot. I'm not sure if you're still watching, but if you're still out there, they were from the top. It's always going to be something because it's always something. Good hair days, bad hair days. It's always something. Earring, earring that won't, you know, do what it's supposed to do. The second one, you are the reflection of the people whose opinions matter to you. Not the 6 people you spend the most time with, not the 50,000 people in the world, but the people whose opinions matter to you the most. These aren't always even people that you care about. And that's deep. That's something that a lot of us don't understand. But sometimes the people whose opinions matter to us the most are the ones that we don't actually care about the most, but who we have control over. The third one, you will find your God, and that is all that matters. Whatever your path is, whatever road that you walk towards little g or big G, that's yours, and it's yours, and that's all that matters. Number 4, luxury and pleasure are our birthright. The universe knows this. That's why flowers smell good. That's why food tastes good. That's why sex is fun. The universe recognizes ultimately, if I want to get people to do the things that help my universe stay moving forward, I need to make it feel good for them. I like this law. This one's good. Finally, you don't owe anyone anything. I teach students all the time. I teach people all the time. A lot of different subjects, and I intend to cover a lot of things. But one of the most important things I've discovered is that the simplest truth is the hardest to swallow. Simplest truth is the hardest to swallow because we think that everything is very complicated, and we've been taught that everything is really complicated, but it's not. The truths that I've been talking about are universal and timeless. If you read any of the ancient texts, or even not so ancient texts, there's some really profound thinkers and feelers. They talk a lot about these things, about finding God, about knowing your path, um, about opinions, about the world and our place in it, and about the bondage that guilt and recriminations and the feeling indebtedness can bring. So what I have distilled down, those 5 simple truths, comes from a long line of thinkers greater than me that have kind of brought to our world and put out in our world a different way of looking at things, a different way of living. So where did that lead me? Which is where I started. Last year, I started living and loving your best. And when I started living and loving your best, I had one mantra in my head that kept repeating itself over and over and over again. And it was, when we know better, we can choose better. When we know better, we can choose better. And that was a two-part acknowledgement that sometimes we live lives that we just don't realize we're living because we've never been taught to examine them. And sometimes we live lives that we want to be living. They're our choice, and we like them and we live them, and we don't want to change. Living and loving your best isn't for the second person. Living and loving your best is for the first person, the person who says, you know what, this isn't quite how I would like for it to be, and I want to figure out how to make what I see in my head as my life, my world, and my identity come out of me, come into fruition, lift me up. And so I began with this idea, simple idea, that, well, the best way to do that is to help people know their stories, is to help people figure out along the way their signposts are that they might have ignored or not realized were there. And these 5 simple truths are kind of the first foray down a path where I hope maybe I've illuminated along your path a little bit. Some signposts that maybe you're like, oh, let me go stand over here under this signpost and see if maybe I can see something in my own life that fits or that I could work on. I don't assume to know that everyone is going to appreciate what I have said. And I recognize that for some people this will not go over well. But I do believe, and I stand on the premise that we are one relationship away from our highest and most authentic personhood. And that relationship is the one we have with ourselves, first and foremost. Everything else is secondary. Everyone else is secondary. Every other part of life is secondary to the relationship that we have with the person staring back at us in the mirror. So I hope that you've enjoyed this brief hangout. I was really nervous, and I hope that if you watch the replay that you find something useful to it. You can find me on my blog at Living and Loving Your Best. That is SasheenMobley.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Sasheen Mobley, PhD, and that's my business page. Please come over and check it out. Like my page. I am also on Instagram at Sasheen Mobley, and I am launching a 6-week session called Change Your Story, Change Your Life. If you're interested in anything that I have said today, or if you have any questions, please leave a comment in the Hangout or over on my YouTube channel, Sasheen Mobley, LLYB, soulPATH Services. I try to respond. I don't always get to them immediately, but I do try to respond. But I would love to hear from you. So if you'd like to engage with me, I would love to engage with you. And on that note, have a wonderful day. Namaste.